Hello, and welcome to episode 14 of How to Renovate. Tash here, and I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you found me. I'm here to help you renovate better. So, in this episode, we are going to be talking about how to deal with budget overruns during the construction phase. So, this is really a big deal because this is the thing that causes sometimes the most stress in a renovation is when the budget starts to start going out of control. And you can totally see why. It's because people usually have a set amount in their minds. They perhaps have had their builder quote, so they in their minds think that they know exactly what it should cost. But unfortunately, in build projects, things often come up, unexpected things come up, particularly if you're dealing with an older property that you're renovating. Sometimes you start taking things apart, unexpected things come up, like for example, the electrics might be too old to connect to a new system, or as you start demoing and taking the plaster off the walls, you might find that the structure is not what you thought, and it doesn't meet building regs, so new structures need to be put up. So there are a number of things that could come up that could cost you extra money. So I wanted to do an episode on this topic so that we can not only look at some of the things that come up, but we can also look at how you could deal with the budget as and when these things come up. Hopefully they won't. Perhaps you're lucky in your renovation, but I find there's always some unexpected things, sometimes big, sometimes small, that do come up during a renovation project. So when you're renovating, you're just dealing with so many different trades, with so many different professionals. So, you know, overruns can be quite common. But as I always say, knowing the process, knowing the sequence of a renovation before you start will just kind of set you up for a much smoother ride, because you'll know what to expect, you'll know the different phases, you'll know when unexpected expenses might crop up, and it just puts you in a more comfortable position. It's kind of almost managing your own expectations of that these things can and may happen, and when they happen, or if they happen, you are ready to deal with them. Okay, so in this episode, we're going to explore 4 things that you can do to help manage your budget during the construction phase. In our 5-pillar process, the info in this episode falls under Pillar 4, practical management. Everything I teach about renovations falls under this process, and there'll be more information on how to get your hands on some resources on the process at the end of this episode. Okay, so let's get into it. So number 1 is to prioritize and negotiate the scope. So by this we mean is when you're starting to see that the budget might be starting to get out of control, is to have a really close look at your itemized budget and then start to prioritize what the most important things are. So I do this all the time in the renovation projects, and how I do it is I look at the things that are within the structure. So things that would be difficult to change later down the line. Those are the things I usually prioritize. So to give you an example, a project I worked on recently, all of the electrics needed to be replaced, which we weren't expecting. We thought the existing electrics could be connected to a new system, which it couldn't. So they all had to be ripped out. So that was an unexpected expense that we had to put into the budget. Another thing that came up is that this project included a loft conversion. So we then discovered that the roof condition was actually a lot worse than we first anticipated. And we had to make the decision to almost completely rebuild the entire roof structure. So we reused the existing tiles, but they had to all be removed, new membrane put in, and then the tiles needed to be cleaned and put back on again. So there was a huge labour cost, and there was some material costs as well for the new membranes and so on. So those two things together added a lot of money to the project that we weren't expecting at all. On the same project, we were going to replace all the sash windows with double glazed new sash windows. But because of the unexpected expenses, I then had to delay the window replacement. So because the window replacement is something that could be done in a few years' time, it can be done quite easily, so that old windows can be removed quite easily in their whole unit without much damage to the work that's already been done, and they can easily be installed, or the new ones can easily be installed in their place with just some, they just have to kind of make good around the frames and reseal them. So the windows were going to be a huge cost, but because the huge costs were then spent, the huge amount of money was spent on the unexpected items, we had to find something quite big that could be either taken out of the project or done at a later stage without having to rip other things out that had already been done. So you can see how you have to really think things through and think about where you are spending the money when it's really needed, but also down the line, if you do need to delay things, that those things that you're delaying are not going to then cause you having to undo work that you've already paid to have done. So constantly adjusting, checking the budget, constantly prioritising when you need to, and compromising perhaps here and there will really help you keep on track with your budget. And then, communication is also key here, because if you have to negotiate on the scope or on these adjustments, you need to be able to speak to your contractor about it. And I'm always quite transparent with the contractors about, how much money there is for the project, when we're getting close to the line, when we might be having to run into contingency, and you can, be honest with your contractor, and hopefully if you've chosen well, they can, be sympathetic to that. You can work things out. You can maybe discuss using different materials. You can negotiate on labour. There are things you can do if you can kind of be transparent and discuss these things and find a solution together. So the second thing you can do is to track your budget. So this is something I do at least on a weekly basis. So this means that you kind of have your line item budget set out, and it would have the costs next to it. It would be the estimates, or it would be what the contractor quoted for all the different items and all the labour in that budget. And I regularly monitor it, because as soon as a real quote comes in, or a real cost for an item, so the budget, for example, might have estimated costs that you might have done a few months before the project started, and so kind of when you're in the thick of it, the real costs start coming in, or materials or items you might have wanted might have gone up in price. So you have to regularly plug in the real figures into that budget, and then just keep tracking it, keep making sure that your bottom line is still where it should be. And if you do need to make adjustments, you will quickly start to see when you need to do those, because you'll see if you're overspending on certain things, or there's been a huge increase in one thing or another, then obviously you need to adjust for that somewhere else and compromise for it somewhere else within the budget. So this is a big one for me. Regularly monitoring will really keep you on track with your budget, and it will just help you kind of prevent those huge overruns, because sometimes it's easy just to, if you've got momentum in the build and you're spending, and then you go back to your budget maybe a month and a half later, and you start plugging in all the figures, it could be a huge unpleasant surprise that you're suddenly way over where you were supposed to be. So please do this one. Regularly monitor and adjust your budget. And the third thing you can do is to value engineer. So this one is a little bit of a tricky one because it usually means if you've already started the project and you're kind of mid-project and you're in the construction phase, it usually means making changes, and sometimes quite big changes. And usually what I always recommend against is making big changes during the construction phase, because it is the most expensive time to make changes or to undo things that have been done already. And that can really get expensive. But that being said, when you start to get into real trouble with a budget, and perhaps you've had lots of unexpected expenses, and you get to a point in the budget where you realize you're really in trouble, I think then this comes into play, because you then need to speak to perhaps your architect, your contractor, if there are major changes that need to be made to significantly reduce what's remaining of the project, so that you can still come in at an amount you can afford. If you can't get any extra funding, then you may need to make some major changes. You may need to reduce the scope of the project, the size of the project, the spec. So this is really kind of quite a drastic measure. So this is if, you're in real trouble with a budget and you need to really modify and make quite big changes, whether that's material changes or size changes, then this comes into play. But you can value engineer from the start. So let's say you're in the planning phase and you'll have been able to get quite accurate quotations, and you can see that the quotes are coming in a lot higher than you were expecting, then you can value engineer at that stage. And that's probably a much better stage to try and value engineer at than when you've already started and you're in the construction phase. But like I said, usually this comes in when there's been major issues or major unexpected expenses during the project. So hopefully you won't have to deal with that one too much. Okay, so moving on to the next one. So number 4 is arrange backup financial options. So this means that even beyond your contingency, you have to really be prepared for unexpected costs to arise. So even beyond your contingency, I really would strongly suggest setting things up so that you can, if you need it in an emergency, if things start to go wrong, you've got that emergency button to press to get that extra funding to just get your project finished or get it over the line. Because getting close to the end of the project and not having the money to finish can be really, really stressful and upsetting. Let's say you've moved out of your home to do it up, you're paying extra rent, or you're living with family. So the stresses really do build up when you get to the end of the project and you don't quite have enough just to get it, signed off by building control or ready enough to move in or move your family back in. So if you are in the position to, look into extra funding, look into perhaps you can get a loan set up but not quite push the button on it yet. Perhaps you have family or friends that might be able to help you out that you could speak to and just kind of warn as a backup. So I really would say have that emergency funding in mind for if you really do get into trouble towards the end of the project. I think it just knowing that it might happen and tracking throughout and seeing if you might have to kind of push the button on that, it's much better knowing, isn't it? It's much better kind of looking forward and going through tracking and then knowing what might come up, rather than just blindly going through and all of these things coming up unexpectedly. And when you're already doing something stressful, if you're perhaps not living in your home, the construction phase can be quite a stressful thing. So I think just preparing yourself, knowing that sequence, knowing what might come up and what you might have to deal with, that in itself will make it less stressful. It's just, again, managing your own expectations of a project. And that nicely brings us to the end of the episode. I really hope this was helpful. Budget is really a big stressful one, I would say, for most people doing a renovation, especially these days. You know, things are expensive, labor has gone up, materials have gone up. So now more than ever, I would advise that you really keep a keen eye on your budget all the way through. Just, you know, do all these things, track, prioritize, keep tracking, keep checking. I hope you enjoyed it, and please, I have a favor to ask you. If you enjoyed the episode and if this podcast has been helpful to you so far, please do subscribe or like or share. It just helps other people who might need some renovation advice find us as well, and then I can help even more people with their renovations. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now. For more information on my 5-pillar process for successful renovation, you can go directly to southplacestudio.com/pillars, where you'll find an introduction to the process which covers each of the pillars and what they cover. We also have a number of other free renovation resources. Go now to southplacestudio.com/freebies. I have created some amazing freebies for you there. There is one on the process, like we just said. There is one on planning permission. There is one on kitchen design. There is another one on lighting planning. Go and check those out. There's so much free information there to help you with your renovation.